All right, good morning, dudes and dudettes. Hope everybody's doing well. One take, everybody knows the rule. So for today, we're going to be talking about political values. So last video, we talked about the political ideologies and the spectrum of what those political ideologies are. Now we need to understand what are the actual values that go with those political ideologies. For this class, there are two main perspectives to take. We have authoritarian regimes and we have democratic regimes. There's three countries in each, and we don't really care necessarily about the aggressiveness of either Democrat or authoritarian. We care much more about just what it is. So a lot of times when we're talking about comparing governments, so comparative government is we are trying to just see if this happens in a democratic regime, then does this also happen in a authoritarian regime? And if the answer is no, that's a great comparison to be able to make. So the overall idea is that if we have these different political ideologies, whether that be socialism versus, just a general authoritarianist ideology, then we are focusing on what is the main factor of those to be different. And the main factor is almost always going to be rule of law. So this is a value that is highly democratic. Being able to understand that you have a written down law that allows for this democratic regime to control essentially everything. There has to be something written down that specifically states so-and-so does this, so-and-so is not allowed, so-and-so can be done. That is the most powerful thing for these political values and political beliefs. Because in a democratic regime, if you do not have written laws and you are doing whatever you want, that's how you turn socialism into fascism. That's how you turn, I guess you would like to say, that's what would turn this neoliberalist ideology into fascism, is that a person can just, or a leader can just change what's going on because they believe that? I'm not necessarily sure. What else? Why else would they go against the rule of law? They just want to believe something differently. So the general idea is that we are looking at this concept of rule of law, and this is going to be the main focus point for comparative government almost always, because it's just the easiest thing to look at. Certain countries do rule by law, which basically means they make up the law as they go. They can create the law, and if they create the law, they can do whatever they want. So their political values just are what they feel that day. If they wake up angry, they're going to create a bad law. If they wake up sad, they're going to create a bad law. Kind of like the tweets or what the truths, whatever they're called, the truths that are happening with the Don. Kind of wakes up one day feeling upset, and you get a really weird AI of an airplane pooping on people. I don't know, something like that. So overall, what we're focusing about the concept of rule of law versus rule by law and how that impacts citizens. So generally speaking, these political values and beliefs of citizens are focusing on political corruption. Countries that struggle with political corruption are going to have relatively bad political beliefs. Generally speaking, countries that have really strong rule of law are going to be allowing them to have pretty good political beliefs. So the overall idea of this concept of political beliefs and values are just trying to connect the dots. We're saying that a group of citizens are most likely going to have a healthy discourse, a healthy life, and want to believe in their political regime if there's rule of law and lacking corruption. And then vice versa is true as well, right? If the citizen does not believe that their voices are being heard, if the citizen does not believe that the laws are on their side, if the citizens are not in a good well-being perspective, not enough protection, lacking welfare, then they're probably not going to have very good political beliefs and values. So it all just tries to connect the dots. You're trying to say, why does so-and-so, why does this country have a lot of protests? Why does this country have ample amount of people leaving the country? Well, it's because their political regime is ruled by law. Due to it being ruled by law, there's limited public health care, there's limited welfare systems, there's limited ability to protest. So in return, the citizens will just leave, right? That is the connection we're making, right? And the overall, I guess you want to say, final perspective to take is going to be post-materialism, which is something that has been happening in the recent few decades. Is kind of a concept that we're focusing on, which is just, instead of valuing like material objects, instead of saying, oh, I have a car and it makes me feel good, right? Which was relatively common post depression in America. Nowadays, post-materialism is the concept of like self-expression, that they're trying to find a perspective in their life to where that they are fighting for something higher than themselves. So that's the reason why we've been seeing, as of recently, a lot more of those I don't even know if I want to call them protests, but when the environmentalists go do something that's just kind of generally annoying, where they sit in line on a highway, or they glue their hand to a car, that is them doing post-materialism, right? They're trying to value themselves socially by applying pressure on environmental issues. They're saying, it's not just me, I'm doing a higher good. And that would be kind of a new perspective we have to take with comparative government, is because, generally speaking, if you were to look in history, if you were to look in World War I era, it was more about materialism rather than post-materialism. Instead of focusing on the literal thing that's inside your hand, you're now focusing on the kind of like higher order thinking of social issues, economic equality, environmental issues, to which are now all the main talking points inside of modern politics. The vast majority of modern politics focus on basically those three things: environmental issues, economic inequality, and specifically a social issue of immigration. And that's all post-materialistic perspectively. So, generally speaking, again, for political values and beliefs, we're focusing on the concept of rule of law versus rule by law, how that impacts the day-to-day life of their citizens, and then their ability to act out their actual political values and beliefs is going to be a high correlation to the regime type. If the regime is socialist, or if the regime is a democratic regime, or if the regime is a authoritarian regime, all of this is going to come back and essentially give you a great talking point for a potential FRQ. All right? I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Sleep well, eat well, and have fun.